Good afternoon to all of our UK column viewers and listeners. Welcome to a really interesting interview. I've got with me today director Chris Burgard, who's going to be talking to me about a number of his productions, but the key one that we're interested in is around Capitol Hill riots. So we're going back to the 6th of January 2021. And I'm very interested in what's taken place here because, as our regular viewers will know, over the last few months, I've been able to interview three CIA professionals. So I've talked to both field agents, one of whom, J. Michael Waller, I did 3 interviews with, but I've also talked to Michael J. Sweeney, who was head of CIA litigation at one point, and he's principally was talking about the differences between the security services investigations to Donald Trump and Biden. And the other one was Pedro Israel Horta, who was a CIA field operative who discovered problems inside the CIA. We could say serious lack of professionalism, but that was putting people's lives at risk. And when he whistle-blew those particular incidents, he was eventually forced out of the CIA. So that's my little background. And I'm going to say, Chris, welcome to UK Column, and thank you very much for agreeing to join me today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Okay. Now, if I may, and I just have to check some of the paper in front of me, because you are a award-winning filmmaker. You've done some very interesting work. You made your 1986 Hollywood debut as Matthew Broderick's dance double in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And if I remember correctly, that's about a college student, and he goes on a day off adventure around Chicago. But you've also done things such as the Tour of Duty, Death County, and the River of Broken Dreams. And then you've had a particular interest around the events that have taken place in Capitol Hill. So please tell us a bit more about yourself and how you got into filmmaking.
I was born and raised in the Midwest in Wisconsin. Y'all in the UK are a bit familiar with it, but that was horse country, farm country. My dad was a law enforcement. He was a veteran. And I went out to Hollywood to be in the movie business, acted in movies, started writing. And then in 2005, I made my first documentary about the southern border. And I went out to the southern border and embedded with people on the border, ranchers, law enforcement, and we made the movie called Border, which screened for Congress in 2007. It was an important grassroots tool in stopping the Bush amnesty immigration movement that he was trying to do in 2007. And that got me blacklisted in Hollywood. People I knew for 20 years wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't return phone calls. Didn't see the movie, but it was just so propagandized that anybody that was telling the truth was attacked. And that put me on a whole other path to just doing movies that tell the truth. So I've been blessed to be in Central America when they tried to take over government down there, 20 years on and off the border. And I've had 3 movies play for Congress: Border, Death County and the River of Broken Dreams, and our latest film, The War and Truth, which is War and Truth is the second film we made about January 6th. I was there on January 6th with my family and with my partner and good friend Nick Searcy. As the events unrolled that day, it was evident to me I was having flashbacks, deja vu, back to being in Honduras in Central America when they were trying to overthrow the government down there. And we didn't know we were going to make a movie about January 6th until we saw the false narrative that was coming out. So we just documented what happened that day. And that was a movie called Capital Punishment. Everything they told you about J6 was a lie. And because I made that movie, I was in the middle of making another movie with a friend of mine, Tom Homan, who's now the border czar of the United States. I had just gotten back from the border, and it was the day before they hit Mar-a-Lago. FBI came to my ranch, and I found out I was being investigated as a terrorist threat to the United States of America for making Capital Punishment. So that was pretty tense for my family and I for a while. And after The attorneys got us on a quieter side of all that. My partner Nick says, "Well, if they're doing this to you, what else are they doing to everyone else out there from January 6th?" So instead of sitting back and waiting for the FBI to come back to our ranch, we decided to make another movie, which was The War on Truth. And The War on Truth will simply blow your mind, because when you see what happened on January 6th, when you see how it was a psychological operation run with military precision, from the highest levels of our government, it just rocks your sense of reality.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, should we just play the trailer for The War on Terror, and then we'll get you to comment a little bit.
I didn't want to make this too painful. I don't think our conversation could take probably more than 5 or 10 minutes.
You know what you do after the FBI investigates you for making a movie about January 6th?
You make another one.
With investigations related to child sex trafficking, have you reassigned any of these agents?
I don't believe we have reassigned people away from child exploitation.
Lie. So to be clear, the FBI moved you off a pedophile task force to a January 6th task force. Yes.
We have not to date seen any evidence of anarchist violent extremists or people subscribing to Antifa in connection with the 6th.
Lie.
If you are asking whether the violence at the Capitol on January 6th was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources and or agents, the answer is emphatically
You're saying no?
No.
Lie.
There's 5 people, okay, that want to come forward to say that we have facial recognition of all the federal agents.
100 officers were assaulted on that day. 5 officers died.
That was a lie.
Killed by a blow to the head with a fire extinguisher.
Lie.
Died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher.
Lie.
They fixate on the deaths that are not attributed to January 6th while completely ignoring what these really horrific deaths of 4 Trump supporters that afternoon.
The scariest thing about this movie is when you show people the truth, they believe it, and they come together as Americans. We unite. If this movie wasn't so dangerous to the cabal, if this movie wasn't so dangerous to the deep state, they wouldn't be trying so hard to censor it.
Don't be afraid, people. Go see this movie.
Hey, can I help you?
Yes, sir. Are y'all open today?
Not today, we're not.
Director Ray,
No, he's not here today.
can I leave him a message?
Well, I can't give him a message. You got to call to their public relations department.
Yeah, we called and left a message.
We did that for a couple months. Could you ask him if he's still investigating me for making the last movie?
No, I'll see when we do that.
I appreciate that, sir.
Thank you, sir.
That's truly disappointing.
He'd just say the same lies to us that he said to Congress.
So, Chris, you made this movie. How did you get people to engage with it? If you were already under pressure with what you produced previously, how did you get people to engage with making another movie, lifting stones around what took place in Capitol Hill?
We were blessed because when capital punishment was such a pillar of truth that we had been the folks that invested in that movie originally had talked to us about doing a trailer and to do a sequel, do a follow up to the movie. But I didn't know that it was necessary because I thought that there was enough independent people picking up to do a really good job on that. To tell the rest of the story. But God's got a funny sense of humor. When he wants to do something, he whispers in your ear. If you don't listen to him, he taps you on the shoulder. If you still don't listen to him, he punches you in the gut. Well, my gut punch from God was the FBI investigating me as a terrorist threat. 62-year-old filmmaker, award-winning, come from a law enforcement family, worked with law enforcement up and down the border for 20 years. My dad actually graduated from the 109th session of the FBI Academy, and now I'm a threat for making a movie. That's not the way America is supposed to work. So the War on Truth, as you saw Nick and I in that promo there, we're standing in front of the Capitol building. It's just lie after lie after lie. And big doors open and close on small hinges, and the hinge that makes everything fall apart when it comes to the deep state and in the United States of America is January 6th. Because when you show people the truth about January 6th, it changes them. It drops the scales from their eyes, and they're like, oh my gosh, if they've been lying to me about this for 4 years, what else have I been lied to about? And it sets them on a path to search out knowledge and to seek the truth. And that's a big deal. And have that kind of reawakening in America is a big deal. And that's why, long answer to your short question, that's why The War on Truth was the most censored movie of 2024 in America. We had originally, when we screened the film, we had a bunch of affiliates, other influencers that couldn't wait to get this film out. But the pushback was hard and the censorship was real. There's a good Marine, J.D. Rivera, who's in the film. When the movie came out, he reached out to his 110,000 TikTok followers and said, hey, this is a great movie. Y'all should go see this. He was off TikTok within hours, lost all those followers. There was a pastor on Facebook, 1.3 million followers. And he said this should be required viewing in schools across America. His entire account, 1.3 million followers, was gone the next day. That's the kind of censorship we were facing under the Biden administration. And that's not the way the United States of America is supposed to work.
But censorship happening in America, Chris, but it's certainly happening here as well. And I know that some of the Trump administration have actually commented on how onerous they see censorship in the United Kingdom. We could have a separate conversation about this, but I just want to echo it back to you. If you were seeing censorship in the USA, we're certainly seeing it here. And the UK column as a bona fide media organisation is still banned on YouTube for accurate information we put out during the COVID lockdown period. So we live in interesting times. But for a UK column audience, probably most people have only seen reporting on the Capitol Hill incident via the mainstream media. Of course, the BBC is always the powerful media channel in UK. Tell us from the American side, what actually took place in simple terms, and what were the lies that you were so keen to expose?
For those of y'all that weren't at January 6th, and from the media standpoint, it probably seemed like a whole lot of violence, and it was in certain points. But to see the bigger picture, what you actually had was a rally, a First Amendment protest that started people with going to Mr. Trump's rally at the Ellipse, which is at the back of the White House, and then marching about a mile up the Capitol building. And there was between 1 and 2 million people there. It was huge. The mainstream media doesn't show you how large the crowds were. And you literally had 5-6 hours of almost, over 1 million to maybe 2 million people praying and singing and getting along happy down along by the Washington Monument and the Ellipse before the events of January 6th happened. Now, people need to understand, and this is a setup. How this was a setup is the first breaches that were happening with Ray Epps and those people on the sidewalk with the officers and the bicycle racks. President Trump was still speaking. I mean, President Trump was still speaking. Yeah, 2 million people were sitting there, and yet all of a sudden stuff starting to happen up at the Capitol building. And also you had the top journalists and White House photographers. Most of them weren't down with the Ellipse with Trump. They were already pre-positioned up at the Capitol building, which is very strange. So after the president got done speaking, he said everybody would, if they could march peacefully to the Capitol building and just let our voices be heard. Those words have been edited out of context and run as verbatim scripture on mainstream news. They edited it together to make it seem like he was calling people to go do violence, and he wasn't. And as you'll see in our first movie, Capital Punishment, when you see the unedited version of what President said, you're like, how could news media put this on? This is a lie. This is propaganda. And that's your clue that you're in a psyop. That's your clue that this is an information war. Knowledge is power, and America right now is in the greatest information war that we've ever seen. And January 6th was a big battlefield on that. So as everybody moves up, you have this column of people moving up to the Capitol building. And you have to understand, for the folks in the UK, in the United States of America, you can walk on the grass at the Capitol. You can go up and down the steps. You can walk into the Capitol building. You just have to pass through security if you want to go talk to one of the representatives. That's how America is. I've been filming for over 20 years in Washington, D.C. The restricted area that they're talking about now in the Capitol grounds was never restricted before. They had put up tape that said, restricted area, but by the time the bulk of these folks have gotten up there, those were all gone. And if you look at the film and the footage, you can see that these weren't Trump supporters that were pulling the tape down. They were operators, because they're pulling this tape down and there's police there doing absolutely nothing about it. January 6th was a setup. And do y'all ever watch Westerns in the UK? Do you ever see like stampedes and cowboys and that sort of stuff?
I think most people will have. I certainly have, yes.
Okay. So if you understand how a stampede works, I live in Texas, we work cows. You've got a big herd of cattle and you want them to go through this little tiny gate over here. I don't need to go tell every single cow, hey, go up here and turn left. I just need to get the lead steer. And if I can push the lead steer to where I want to go, the rest of the crowd is going to follow. That's what happened on January 6th. You had professional infiltrators in there, and it wasn't just Antifa and BLM type folks. They were there dressed as MAGA supporters, but you also had professional operators infiltrated into the crowd to steer this crowd. And things were done that will touch, that got people to do things they didn't think would happen. There were people in the crowd with bullhorns, inciting people to violence, inciting to charge the Capitol. These people were planted. There were people that were literally directing and pushing people towards the steps and doing that. We know that these people were also operatives. The FBI says that they finally came out after 3 years and said they had 23 assets in the crowd that day. I'll tell you, it was a lot more than 23. There were so many intelligence assets in the crowd that day that FBI payroll lost track of them all. This was a setup, and it wasn't just the FBI. There were other agencies involved, and we need a real investigation, someone with a higher pay grade than mine, to get to the bottom of it. But as you have Michael Waller, who was a guest on your show, Michael was there that day. Michael's been in D.C. for decades. He knew stuff was popping off that wasn't right before the event ever happened, because you had a joint session of Congress, but the security wasn't there. You didn't have the rows of police that you'd usually have. You didn't have the high barricades. They had less than 120 Capitol Hill police officers for the entire piece of property, and they only had bike racks. That was it. This was a setup. As we were walking from the ellipse up to the Capitol building, a mass of people, I'm looking around and I say to my wife, I got a bad feeling. And she goes, what do you mean? I said, look around you. One, there's no police around us, and there's no news crews. Usually in events like this and protests, there's television crews, CNN, MSNBC, Fox. They're all over the place. You're tripping over them. There was none of them on the walk up to the Capitol. So I looked at my wife and I said, I'm having flashbacks to Honduras. I got a bad feeling, because the images you see of multitudes of people praying, people of all different color skin types, singing patriotic songs, they're not filming that, because that tells me that there's going to, the story they want to tell is going to be happening at the end of this march. And I just got a bad feeling. Just as I told my wife that, my partner Nick calls me from the Capitol building, and he said, I just watched the Capitol Police move the bike racks, and they're waving people into the Capitol building. And I turned to my wife and I said, someone's going to die today, because that was my experience in Honduras. And 2.5 hours later, Ashley Babbitt was dead, Kevin Greason was dead, Benjamin Phillips was dead, Roseanne Boyland was dead. And this leads me to, if you haven't seen The War on Truth yet, and I highly recommend y'all go see this film, you can tell when it's an operation by the cover-up. And there was a fella that his name was Joseph Goebbels, and he said if you make the lie big enough and tell it often enough, it becomes truth to the state. Joseph Goebbels worked for a fellow named Adolf Hitler. And this is what happens on January 6th. And here's one thing you can look at. The Biden administration at the highest levels, FBI, Department of Justice, and the mainstream media for 3.5 years all ran with the mantra that on January 6th, 5 law enforcement officers died. 5 law enforcement officers died on January 6th. That is a lie. Officer Brian Sicknick died the early morning hours of January 7th of natural causes. He did not have his head bludgeoned to death by MAGA supporters like the Biden administration pushed. The other 4 police officers that died weeks and months later from suicides. Suicide attempts weeks and months later, which were credited to January 6th day deaths. That's just a lie. Now, what does this cover up? That covers up who really did die that day. Most people know of Ashley Babbitt, who was shot by Lieutenant Byrd, but also Roseanne Boylan, who was crushed and beaten to death on the steps of the Capitol. And then there's Kevin Greason, Benjamin Phillips. They died of heart attacks, but one of them was hit in the chest, just standing there on the other side of the crowd, and he was hit in the chest with a flashbang. And you'll see the footage in The War on Truth. The flashbang blows up, burns the guy's face next to him. He turns and screams. This guy goes down. His heart stops, and he dies. And you see him working on him, trying to do CPR, but they never bring him back. These 4 deaths are never talked about and have been covered up by pushing this other lie that you make big enough, you tell it often enough, it becomes truth to the state. That's how you know that you're in a psychological operation in the middle of an information war.
Chris, if I can respond to that and say your narrative is just so interesting, particularly so for me, because I remember the interviews with J. Michael Waller so well. And in the first interview, he was talking about being there at the event. And then he said, I just started to see things which weren't right from my experience. And he's an experienced CIA field operations man. He talked about seeing things that weren't right. And I remember him saying to me that he just began to notice these people who did not fit in with the crowd. They were dressed differently. And I'm very sure he said, and something which attracted my attention was that they hadn't got the spirit of the crowd, whereas most of the crowd were very jovial. They were in a very good mood. These were individuals who he said you could see had got a sense of coordination about them, but they didn't look like the other individuals. So you're giving a personal opinion on what you saw there. J. Michael Waller, as a trained CIA man, also talking about this. But your particular focus is on, if I've got this right, is on FBI operatives there, as opposed to other police operatives or deeper state security people. It was the FBI that had the bulk of the presence on the ground.
We don't know if it was we know the FBI had a large presence there, but we don't know if it was the biggest because we don't know the other organizations there. There was also DEA was there that day. ATF was there that day. My firsthand knowledge and what you'll see in the movie is you'll see people changing out of Antifa clothes into Trump clothes. These same people, just with a few minutes later, are trying to get my wife and I and my daughter to attack the Capitol Police, to do violence. We filmed them. We knew they were infiltrators. We knew they were imposters. We called them out, and when they did, they ran away. And as they run away, you can see their handler going with them with the earpiece in his ear. And this is how you knew these guys. What Michael's talking about the people you saw up the Capitol that didn't fit in. When you see people with sunglasses, with scarves around their necks, their heads pulled down, and earpieces in their ear, that's not your average Trump supporter. You know, when you were at the Washington Monument or down by the ellipse where Trump was speaking, nobody was wearing masks. Nobody was wearing masks. Remember, this is America, the lockdown. Well, the people that went there, one of the reasons everybody was so happy, it was the first time people had gotten together and to see people and to meet people and no masks. But if you look at most of the violence and the people that were the players in the breach of the Capitol, they all either had masks on or they even had military gear or gas masks. These were not Trump supporters. These were infiltrators. And that's what Michael's talking about. So after we filmed these Antifa type people pretending, changing clothes, trying to get us to do violence and pretending to be Trump supporters, I ran into FBI units on the ground that day. And I said, hey, you've got bad guys over here trying to get us to attack the Capitol Police. You want to know who they are? No. Do you want me to give you the video? No. Do you want me at least give you a picture or take a statement? No, we're good. So at the time, I just thought, okay, well, they must have this all handled. Not a big deal. But then a few weeks later, when you see Christopher Wray, the head of our FBI, testify to Congress and say that he saw no evidence that there were Antifa or BLM or anarchist type people there that day contributing to the violence, that either makes him the most misinformed director of the FBI or he's lying. And if you're lying at that part, then that means you're either part of the operation or part of the cover-up or both. Because we saw Antifa, BLM type operatives that day doing violence. We filmed them. They filmed themselves, as in the case of John Sullivan, who's on film bragging about how he was part of planning this operation. It just goes to give pause to say, how far up does this cover up go? And it goes to the top.
This is the key point, isn't it? Because I think any of us, all of us, would be very happy to say in our life experiences, we've learned that politicians lie and they cover up. But when we have the state security agencies that are supposed to be there to protect us, whether those are the agencies in America or the UK for that matter, when those individuals are engaged in nefarious purposes and subsequently they're covering up what they did, what they took part in, this is really serious because we're effectively talking about a breakdown in the very basic institutions of state. So Capitol Hill, to me, represents something very, very serious because, as you say, it was done in plain sight. People died as a result of what took place, and then there's lies and cover-ups. So who do you think is driving the agenda?
Who do I think is driving the agenda, or who do I think were like the architects of January 6th?
Who are the people that orchestrated what happened, and who are the people that are subsequently covering up? Of course, the next question is why.
If you understand what a color revolution is and how a color revolution works to take power, it's usually after a contested election. You have foment on one side, the left, foment on the other side. You get them going like it's crazy. You work the two sides against each other, and then you grab power out of all that chaos. That's what January 6th was about. January 6th, the purpose of the operation on January 6th was at all costs to stop. Because remember, in the United States of America, and why we showed up, is they were going to debate, before they did a tally, they were going to debate whether or not they should investigate the contested ballots in these swing states, which would have changed the election, would have handed it to Trump. So why you saw 2 million people out there, we just wanted to have our voices heard. We naively thought that if we just showed up and people in Congress would know, hey, there's 2 million people out there that took the time to come out here because election integrity is important to them, the least we can do is take a 10-day pause to investigate this. So on the floor of Congress, as the first state was coming up and had just been voted in to be investigated, Congress stands up, there's a standing ovation in Congress, then a flare goes up over the Capitol building and the first breach of the Capitol happens. And the breach happens, they shut down for over 3.5 hours. And when they come back, there's no longer any challenge, any political will to hold these investigations. So that was the main mission of what January 6th was for. It was to stop the investigation into a corrupt election. Now, so you have to ask yourself, well, who benefits for that? Well, who benefits is the people that got into power, people on the left, the Bidens, and as well as whatever international partners they may be working with. We know that China was part of corrupting our election. That was in the Navarro report, the IG report. What we don't know is to what extent did it flip the election? How was it there? And they weren't the only player. These are all things that would have come out if we would have had that investigation in Congress. So then you ask yourself, well, who did this? If you look to 2014, a lot of this goes back to Ukraine, which is hard for people to understand how Ukraine and January 6th are related. But there were, on the local level, on the ground level, we ran into Ukrainians that were there that day. There was Ukrainian there, Sergei Debinin, who was an activist in the 2014 overthrow of the Ukrainian government. How does a guy like that get in the United States of America? How does he get to the Capitol building on January 6th? Plus, he's taking selfies with a buffalo horn guy that is already pre-scripted as the leader of the QAnon MAGA army. Okay, this is all a pre-scripted operation. So we saw Ukrainians there on the ground that day, but what you really need to look at, and if there was ever going to be an investigation held at a higher level, possibly a military investigation, I would say look at who were the players in the Ukraine Revolution of 2014 from our side. You may want to look at Victoria Nuland. You may want to look at Norm Eisen. You may want to look at a guy named Eric Ciamarella. And while you're at it, see if John Brennan had his hand in any of this stuff. That's who I would investigate if I were going forward. The United States has been part of orchestrating color revolutions around the country. Around the planet. And now, January 6th, we had one happen right here in Washington, D.C. That's what that day was. And then the second part of it was you not only stopped the investigation into the contested votes in the swing states, but now you've also demonized a whole section of the country, your political opponents, and they've now weaponized the United States law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and intelligence services against its own people. January 6th was the day the federal government, the United States of America, attacked its own people. They beat them, they hurt them, some died, and they put them in prison. A lot of them were put in prison to shut them up. That's what January 6th was. Now you've demonized half your people. What did Hitler do? How did the Germans stand by while trainloads of their countrymen were being carried off to the deaths of the camps? How does that happen? It happens because you dehumanize a certain specific part of your population. Well, that's what was happening in the United States of America. Trump supporters went from being deplorables to bloody insurrectionists. Well, if somebody's a bloody insurrectionist and you believe that they attacked your Capitol and they tried to take down your government, then if they're sitting in prison for up to 2 years waiting for trial, you're not going to stick up for them because they're bloody insurrectionists. They've now labeled a whole faction of political opponents as the enemy. And in this case, in the United States, we believe our rights come from God. They don't come from the government. They don't come from bureaucrats or elected officials. They come from God. Those are enshrined in our Constitution. So if you're going to fundamentally transform the United States of America, like Barack Obama said, you have to start with and you have to target the people that believe their rights come from God, which is the Christians and the strong conservatives. And that's who you saw getting hit in the aftermath of January 6th. And you see people people never even went into the Capitol building being charged with felonies and facing time in federal prison for misdemeanors. That's never happened in the history of the United States of America before. This was a weaponization of federal law enforcement to take down any political opposition. And that's something that you can't have that in a free republic. You just can't. It's not who we are. And I don't know, in England or in UK, forgive me, Brian, but I don't know if you all have a right to a speedy trial. In the United States of America, in our Bill of Rights, you have a right to a speedy trial. That means 70 days or less. When it came to January 6th, you had people in prison for over 2 years, federal prison for 2 years, waiting for trial. And a lot of these people, most all of them were people of faith, Christians, and a lot of them were ex-military, some special forces. And you wonder, why are there so many military guys in prison? Why are they looking at them as a threat? Well, back under Barack Obama, there was a woman named Janet Napolitano, who is the director of Homeland Security. And they put out these fusion reports. In the United States, fusion reports are white papers that they use for strategies to dovetail federal law enforcement with state and local law enforcement. And under Obama and Janet Napolitano, they put out that the three most dangerous security threats to the United States of America, and this is the time we were fighting Al-Qaeda and ISIS and terrorists and threats like that. They said that the three most dangerous threats to the security of the United States of America were pro-border security enthusiasts, people who wanted a secure border, Christian pro-lifers, people who were against abortion, and the number one threat was returning veterans. And at the time when that came out, it didn't make sense to me. I was like, okay, I know guys are coming back with PTSD, but they're getting treatment. How can this be a bigger threat than ISIS or Al-Qaeda? But fast forward to January 6th, in which you saw happen, that's who they were targeting. When we're interviewing the first round of people for the War on Truth, the people are sitting in prison over 2 years waiting for trial. They're veterans, they're Christian pro-lifers, and they're pro-border security enthusiasts. That's a weaponization of the system against their own people. And that's what we've been dealing with in the United States of America for the last 4 years.
Thank you for that very precise analysis, Chris. What was in my head as you were going through it is, and you were talking about they were attacking you. You're talking about elements of the US government and its systems and its agencies. And when I have talked to the CIA people that I've interviewed, including J. Michael Waller, but also Joseph B. Sweeney, who was head of litigation for the CIA, both those two individuals are talking about the breakdown and in particular the corruption of the very institutions that should be there to protect American society. So the state agencies that who have a particular role to defend America, but also to, as a nation state, but also people on the streets. They are not only not doing their job, they're acting in a political way which is hostile to the very people they're supposed to protect. So with both those two men, I had a really interesting discussion about how this was taking place. Now, J. Michael Waller was very specific. He talks about these state agencies being subverted, that they have been, on one hand, you could say they've been taken over by the woke agenda, but I think he would be much stronger. He would be saying that those state agencies, the security agencies, have been subverted, compromised and broken down from the inside. So they're no longer doing their proper job. They've been subverted into attacking elements of the of the US population. So when we're starting to get into who is actually attacking people in the United States or here in UK, when we also experience brutality by the police and the closure of free speech, this is a mixture of political systems tied in with these state security agencies. So I've used the word subversion. To me, when I look at the changes that I see happening in UK and the US, to me, it's very clear that we're looking at subversion. The attack is from within the country. What would your response be to that?
I would say that I'm more concerned for the future of my children, for bad players within this country, than I am being attacked by Russia. That's what I would say. I have friends that like I said, my dad graduated in 109th session of the FBI Academy. I was raised in a law enforcement family. I have friends that are law enforcement, that are FBI agents. And it's not monolithic. There's a civil war inside the FBI. I mean, Kash Patel, it's going to be interesting to see what Kash Patel comes out with and what they investigate. I think we're going to see a lot of secret doors thrown wide open. But there was a definite push. Let's just take the FBI alone. It's other agencies too, but the FBI to go woke and to get away from the Constitution. There's a guy named Derek Kinnison whose family was raided. Derek never even went into the Capitol building that day. But when they raided his house, one of the things they did was he had a carton full of pocket constitutions that he would hand out at speaking engagements. The FBI laid those out and photographed them like it was kilos of cocaine, like it was contraband. Because it's come to the point where they're pushing this. They tried pushing this country that if you believed in the Constitution, that you were some radical right-wing person. That's how much our country has shifted. Whereas when I was a kid growing up, you're taught, you read the Constitution, you read the Declaration of Independence, and you try to be a good citizen. Well, our entire public school system has shifted so far away from that. They don't even teach our kids till they're in years 10, 11, or 12, American history. You've got people about to graduate from high school in this country that couldn't tell you the difference between the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. So if you don't understand where you come from as a nation, if you don't understand your history, you can't understand where you're going. So the dumbing down of America has really had an effect when it comes to trying to steal power. When you're trying to turn a country from a free republic to a Marxist state, these are the steps you take. And it's like the Russians told us years ago, give me control of your kids and I'll control the country. That's what we're seeing,
If I mentioned Saul Alinsky to you, you've talked about Barack Obama, but of course in that era, the works of the radical Saul Alinsky were being used not only in America but also in UK. Have you come across his book, Rules for Radicals?
But if you understand Rules for Radical, he explains they lay out their format on how to take a country down, a state from the inside out. If you understand, Mao, if you understand Stalin used to say, I don't care who votes, I care who counts the votes. They've told us what they were going to do in this country, and it's actually been happening. People just haven't paid attention. When people tell you who they are, you have to believe them. When Barack Obama said that he was going to fundamentally transform the United States of America, he wasn't kidding. And, he said at the time that those people, they cling to their Bibles and their guns because they're afraid. Well, that's going after the basic decent American citizen. That's who we are. And this has all been part of a plan to fundamentally change the United States of America. It just now got to a point and a crescendo on January 6th where people saw an operation in action. And now here we are 4 years later, and people are starting to question the truth, and the truth is starting to come out. And it will. I don't know how long it'll take, but it will eventually. And when the people see how badly they've been lied to, they won't stand for it again.
Chris, thank you for that. With the mention there of Saul Alinsky, the thing that I found very interesting many years ago was to see that both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party in UK admitted in documents that were available to the public that they were using the techniques of Saul Alinsky. And I found this utterly fascinating, that the political parties in this country, both sides of the line, were boasting that they were using Saul Alinsky policies within the formulation of their own political policies. And of course, we've seen exactly the same style of breakdown here in UK that you've experienced in the US. And the other little thing that I remember was when Barack Obama was still in power, there was a newspaper article appeared, I think it was the Daily Telegraph, so one of the big newspapers in UK, and it had a picture of Barack Obama standing alongside Gordon Brown, who was the then Prime Minister of UK. And underneath, in 2 columns, they had phrases that they had both used in speeches. And the point the paper was making, that there was uncanny coincidence between the use of key phrases by Barack Obama and Gordon Brown. And the inference, of course, was that by some strange means, the political policy in the States and the UK was being driven in the same direction at the same time. Now, I know that's a bit of an anecdotal story, but I assure you the article I'm talking about exists. And I always found this fascinating, that we should have Barack Obama, the American side of the line, talking about a Saul Alinsky policies to break down Western societies. And then we also had Gordon Brown and a Labour Party who were also referring to those policies. And that, to me, just could not be a coincidence. This had to be a planned agenda. And since it was operating in both countries, it had to be geopolitical, because it was bigger than both. It was policy that was bigger than both countries.
Well, right, because they're on the same side. They're both globalists. I mean, look and see how many of these people have come up to the World Economic Forum. This is a movement of people that no longer believe in sovereign nations. This was told to me back in 2005 by a congressman in the Capitol building. He said, "Look, I go to work every day with people that don't believe in borders. They see transnational corporations as leaders. They look to the borders as something that just gets in the way. They impede the flow of labor, finance, and goods, and they want the borders gone." So you have globalist folks. Obama is a globalist. Gordon Brown was a globalist. And then on the other side, you have folks like me, or you have folks like Donald Trump that believe in our country. We want to get along with our neighbors, and we want to, we love our friends across the globe, but we believe in the United States of America. And we believe that, you can't help others and be the best if you don't have a strong home, if your family's not safe. And that's what we need to take care of first. So what you see is a war between those that want, a global political society, or those that want, nation state sovereign political nations. And you're seeing that manifest with the same words from Obama that you see with Gordon Brown, because it's the same script. This is all an operation. You're living in a psyop. And to tell you how bad things were supposed to be, and I'll tell you, there's a fellow, when you watch the War and Truth movie, his name's Tariq Johnson. He's a former lieutenant in the Capitol Hill Police Department. He was in charge of ground forces that day outside on January 6th. And he will tell you that day, all the people on the ground, the MAGA people and the Capitol Police, they were all set up that day. And what Tariq Johnson did is he did something. He disobeyed a rule on January 6th to change the course of history. He's in the Capitol building. The breach is happening. And he's on the radio for 20 minutes asking his superior, Yogananda Pittman, for permission to evacuate the Senate chambers and the House floor, to get everybody out of there in the name of safety. For 20 minutes, he doesn't get an answer. Finally, he says, "I'm making the call myself. We're going to evacuate the Senate, then we're going to evacuate the House. Let's do it now." And his team, they believed in him, they followed him, and that's what they did. Why this is important is because the rules for deadly engagement for Capitol Police is you can shoot to kill, use deadly force if you're protecting bodies, senators, congressmen. But if it's just real estate, you're not allowed to shoot to kill. That's just trespassing. You're not allowed to do that. So if Lieutenant Johnson would have cleared everybody out of there 10 minutes earlier, 15 minutes earlier, would have changed the rules of engagement, and Ashley Babbitt never would have been shot. If he had done it 15, 20 minutes later, or not at all, then all those people that you saw coming into the House and the Senate would have been shot and killed. And you would have had hundreds of dead Americans in the Capitol building with blood running down the floor. That, I believe, 110% was the original plan of what they wanted to happen on January 6th. So you would have such a bloody, massive event that the nation would never come back to freedom after that. Your First Amendment would be gone. Your Second Amendment would be gone. But because this one police lieutenant disobeyed order, he stopped that carnage. He stopped that bloodshed. Then it later turns out that his superior, Yogananda Pittman, turns out to be the person that held up the intelligence to the chief of police and to the ground forces that would have kept January 6th from happening. The intelligence reports that they had about how many people were going to be there, how there were bad guys planning to do things, that was kept from the rank and file. That was kept from leadership. That's the same woman that denied Lieutenant Johnson's request. She was later promoted and then given a cush job at $500,000 a year in California at the University of Berkeley. It's such a game of nepotism and collusion that I know Hollywood writers that couldn't write something this good, but it's the reality of what's happening. It's the reality of what we've been facing.
Chris, can I ask you? We're into some pretty deep politics here and some serious events. Did you already have knowledge to this depth before you started making the films about Capitol Hill? Were you already on the trail that something was wrong in America and the events in Capitol Hill and making the movies focused you? Or have you been somebody who's been learning over, well, I won't say too many years, but learning over your lifetime?
It's been over 20 years of learning this, and it all happened back in 2005 when I went down to first cover the border. Because what we saw on the border was 180 degrees different from what was being reported on the news. And at the time, I thought if I could just capture what's happening on the border, show the truth of what the ranchers are going through, the illegal immigrants are going through, the law enforcement's going through, if I could just get that truth and show it to our leaders, they would fix the border and they would shut down the drug trafficking, the child trafficking, the rapes and torture of women that was happening on the border. And we documented all this stuff. We're the first person to bring out rape trees. We thought if we just let the government know this is going on, they would fix it. Well, that was my wake-up call. Because up until then, I was in Hollywood, had lots of friends, things were great. When we did that, we became the targets. And that's how we first learned that it's not about the truth, it's about an agenda. And you want to shut down a message, attack the messengers. So my wife and I were attacked. People we knew in Hollywood for 20 years wouldn't return our phone calls. Now they do, because what we said 20 years ago all came true. But 20 years ago, it sounded like conspiracy theory. There's a saying we have in the United States right now. It's what's the difference between conspiracy theory and mainstream media news? And the answer is about 3.5 weeks, because that's how fast things have been changing here in the United States. But the struggle for the soul of America, it's not just intelligence agencies and politicians and foreign governments fighting for control of this country. It's all a battle of good and evil, because most people, I don't know in Europe if they understand that the United States was created by a bunch of people that believed that resistance to tyranny was obedience to God. And at the time, we were an occupied nation by Britain. You had paid German mercenaries, the Hessians, in our population centers, pushing us down. And the people that fought back and won our freedom, they were farmers. They fought during the fall and winter after harvest and before the spring planting came. They fought in the winter with no shoes because they believed so hard in freedom that they would rather die on their feet than to live on their knees. That's who America is. And it comes from our knowledge that our rights come from God. Like I said, not the state. Where you're seeing the United States of America right now is we're seeing a struggle for the soul of America. Is America going to return to God and the Constitution? Or are we going to go the way of the globalists and the World Economic Forum and go to where you own nothing and you'll be happy? That's where we're at right now in the United States of America. And when you see Trump being back in office, the United States has now shifted to going on offense and for our freedom. So you said we live in interesting times. Well, the Chinese say that's a blessing and a curse. May you live in interesting times. Well, we certainly are, but I'm extremely, extremely hopeful because I've been doing this for 20 years. You know, ask me if this is what got me into it. Finding what was on the border and seeing that, it's funny how everything became related. National security for the United States of America starts at the border. And I will tell you that 2.5 years ago, Tom Homan and I, in 2 days, I saw more trained military operatives coming across the border in Texas than I had seen altogether in the previous 18 years. So when you have more people in the United States of America, we've lost more people to fentanyl deaths that have come across that southern border than we lost in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq combined. Okay, the United States of America is in a fifth generation war. I'm sure Michael Waller told you that. And you can't win a war if you don't understand that you're in it. And right now, what you're seeing is an awakening process in the United States of America as people start to learn the truth of what's really going on. And it's January 6th was a big pivot point.
Let's just come back to the film. What sort of type of audience have you had? That film's gone out, people have watched it. Who has it resonated with? Give us a positive report on your efforts.
It's resonating with absolutely everyone, and why it's been the most censored movie of 2024 is because it's a dangerous movie. The truth is the last thing that you want when you're trying to take over a nation. And when people on the left see this, when people on the right see the movie, the conservatives, they see it, they go, okay, that makes sense. Now I understand, oh, this is horrible. We have to stop it. They get it. But when people on the left see this, people that have believed everything that they've been told, everything they've seen on the mainstream media, they get so angry and so upset. In the first movie, we focused on Ashley Babbitt. In our test audiences, some people, some liberals, they didn't cry when Ashley Babbitt died. But a few minutes later, when her dog died of a broken heart because Ashley never came home, then they started crying. Then they lost it. And when that happened, the scales fall from their eyes and they go on a search for truth. So this movie has resonated with everyone, which is why it's been so incredible for us. And then in the War on Truth, when you see these lies, when you see manipulations, when you see how this is an orchestrated event and you're on the left, it makes people it just knocks down belief systems. And the biggest thing I can tell you and your audience, Brian, is you can't just tell people the truth. You have to show them. Now, I've been blessed. I could have been sitting in prison for making capital punishment and never made the War on Truth. Instead, I got to work with, came to work with His Glory Ministries. His Glory Ministries, we're about bringing a billion souls to Christ and bringing the light of truth to the world. Because a lie cannot stand up to the light of truth, and the truth is never afraid of a lie. So on our television network, you'll see everything from great scripture, great Bible stories, great praise music. So you'll see interviews like we're doing now. You'll see Michael Waller. You'll see former FBI agents and whistleblowers like Kyle Seraphim and Steve Friend on our network telling the truth to get the truth out there. Because when people hear the truth, it resonates with them. That's just in our DNA. And we love you guys in the UK. I've seen some of the stuff that you're going through, and I see people being arrested for speech or for thoughts in your country. I look at us and I go, that they're just a few years ahead of us. And as they go, so we go. So we've got to be together on this. We all have to stand together in liberty and freedom, because that's what unites us. And you're seeing that across the board. There's a real crisis right now. In the old days, you controlled the media in America with just 3 news outlets. But now information is everywhere, and people are searching information. They're hungry for it.
I think that was an excellent summary to finish on, really. I was just going to add, when you were talking about people being arrested for in UK, of course, the most telling one is people now increasingly being arrested for praying. And this is very significant in my mind, and it tells us a lot about the belief system of the people we're up against, because they're frightened of prayer. Maybe that's the place to end on.
I don't think you could have picked a better place. I mean, how do we get to this? People are frightened of prayer, and they're arresting people in the UK, And when you see The War on Truth, and go to thewarontruthmovie.com, thewarontruthmovie.com is where you can see this film. I also ask you to go to hisglory.tv. You can see Capital Punishment there for free. You can see the mini-series for The War on Truth for free. You'll see that those that seek to gain power are extremely afraid of those people that believe in prayer. And I think if we could unite in prayer globally, that would just be outstanding, Brian.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I'm going to say thank you very much for giving up your time to be with us. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure people are going to be going to have a look at that material. We'll make sure we give them a good prompt. And I would love to have you back at some stage in the future. Maybe we can do a part 2, or maybe look at some different areas of things that are happening in the States, if you've got time to do that. But thank you very much for joining me today.
You bet. God bless.